Of all the times that I've gone to the convention, all we hear while we're there is how much they love our convention. And the vendors, they love it because, of course, who they talk to at this convention are the decision makers. It is the owners, that are there in person, to make some of these decisions. And I think that brings a lot of value to our convention for the vendors.
This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Daniel Luria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition. And in this week's episode, Rebecca Pauley interviews the organizers of Rocky Mountain NATO, the convention going out in the West Coast, bringing in exhibitors from the area that is coming up in the second half of this episode. But before we get there, we are going over everything surrounding the opening weekend of Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. Fantastic opening weekend of $123.5 million domestically, exceeding every single expectation we had for the title. Joining me here on our panel this week is Emily Garber, the host of Monster Donut, a Percy Jackson podcast. She's got a background in classics and is a lot more familiar with this text than Chad and I will ever be. And of course, I did spoil the second guest here on our panel, Chad Kennard from Box Office Pro, who saw the movie last week. Emily, welcome to the podcast. When and where did you watch Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey?
Thank you for having me. So I saw it opening night as well in Brooklyn at the Alamo Draft House, which was great.
Chad, you mentioned it. You saw this over at one of the Regal locations in Colorado?
Yeah, the Regal UA Colorado Center.
Nice. And that was an IMAX 70. Did you catch one of those 70 millimeter screenings?
I did, yeah. I felt very fortunate to see it in that format.
They are in hot demand right now. As we go over those numbers, as I mentioned, the $123.5 million domestic haul from The Odyssey being complemented by a strong overseas performance of $140 million from 40 overseas territories, coming in first place with a massive overperformance. And let me just go over some of these domestic stats before we dive into the film itself, because we really have to just highlight what this movie did in terms of demographics, in terms of getting older moviegoers out the theaters. 76% of the audience was above the age of 25. Now, I know that the narrative this year has been Gen Z audiences are back at the movies. The Odyssey did something that very few tentpoles have been able to do in the last 3-4 years. Get that older moviegoer back on opening weekend. Well, 53% of the opening weekend haul domestically for The Odyssey came from enhanced formats. The 33 70 millimeter IMAX theaters in the US giving us 4% of the total box office. That's crazy. 33 theaters in the domestic market being responsible for 4% of an opening weekend haul. Big, big numbers. But we can't forget the reality is that the entire premium format conversation is much bigger than just IMAX alone. IMAX contributing 23% of the entire opening weekend haul for the title. But this isn't an IMAX only conversation when 77% of the audience sees this movie in a different format, in a different type of experience. And that's precisely the way I saw it in a super screen DLX over in a Marcus Theater. Emily, you saw it in an Alamo Draft House here in New York City. Also a great presentation. I think everyone's coming out of this title just exhilarated, very excited. Chad, you gave us your just off the cuff insights last week. Emily, before we dive into specifics on this, what was your reaction of the film?
It took me all weekend to figure out how I felt about this movie.
That's what I like to hear. That's what I like to hear. That's good. Why are you on the fence? Because there's been so many takes on this, right? There's been a lot of folks saying, I refuse to watch this movie because of casting choices that I wouldn't have made. But fine, that's their prerogative. I don't think that made any difference whatsoever in the performance. There are folks like myself that told Chad last week, Chad, this feels like homework to me. I'm not a Christopher Nolan guy. I'm not into the classics. I guess I'm going to walk in there. I'll share more details later. I loved it. I came in convinced by it. And Chad, I don't want to steal your words here, but what would your 2-sentence summation of this movie would be before we figure out what was lacking in Emily's experience watching it.
Well, I think I mentioned it last time. I think it continues to prove that Christopher Nolan is one of our biggest and best storytellers and maybe most daring. Yeah, I was swept away by it. Yeah, and I do think that the format can play a difference in that. I talked to someone else that saw just a regular screening somewhere, and they had a lot of comments that I didn't necessarily see in terms of the projection wasn't the best in their screening room, and I do think,
Really?
I
Yeah.
think it's after walking out, I was like, "Man, if you don't see
Mm.
that in a good presentation, you might have different thoughts about the movie."
I agree with that. I agree with that. Presentation is half the battle here. I don't know if you guys have seen, for example, some of the viral footage that we've seen from moviegoers in 4DX screenings and some of those like high seas adventure scenes. That
Mhm.
4DX water effect just working overtime. Of course, Emily, you didn't see it with water splashing at your face and your popcorn going everywhere and moving seats. But it sounds to me like someone with your background in classics, y you're not going out saying I disliked it, but you're not giving it an all-out endorsement either. I'm curious, let's poke into that. What about the movie connected with you first? And then let's
Mm.
go into all the details where you didn't exactly follow along.
Yeah, well, I mean, craft-wise, from the perspective of the actual making of this movie was phenomenal, like, truly gripping. Like, I'm a person where every once in a while my attention does tend to wander in longer form works of art, and it's always a testament to how good it is and, like, the pacing of it if I'm not getting like, having moments where I'm kind of pulled out of the movie, or, like, a musical or theater show is the same, and this one was gripping. Like, I wasn't really thinking that much about it for large swaths of this film, which for me, again, is a sign that I'm in it.
You were in it all the
Um,
way. It didn't feel like a 3-hour movie for you either, because I think for both Chad and I mean, I walked in there, and by the first time I checked my watch during the running time, we were already, like, 2 hours in. Like, it
yeah.
just it really flew by.
Yeah, and the sound design specifically, I thought was phenomenal. The soundscaping of it, I really enjoyed. I don't know, it's been a while since I've seen a movie where I could really feel like there was a care being put in creating new cinematic language, like with the bowstring and all of this stuff, that he was laying out where, like, the language of the film itself was adding some new, like, elements to the story and conversation in a way that was really exciting. I think as a classics person, also something I talk a lot about with the Odyssey is how much it really like, I think something about the Odyssey that a lot of people who maybe have seen other adaptations wouldn't really know is that it's really horror. A lot of those encounters Odysseus goes on are horror encounters. They're structured like horror. You walk in thinking everything's good, and then there's these dramatic twists that occur. So I think I really appreciate that he captured that element of it.
We first see the Cyclops. That thing's terrifying. And I
Yeah,
love that, like, Goya wink of, like, Saturn eating his child. I forget the name of the painting, but it's terrifying every time that very imposing Cyclops comes on the screen. And, yeah,
yeah,
a lot of it felt like a horror movie, and I think an effective horror movie and probably as close to that genre I think a filmmaker like Christopher Nolan is gonna go into. I know Insomnia had, like, thriller, like, true crime-ish thriller aspects to it, but wasn't exactly that. We had real monsters here, and I did appreciate that as well. I do think that was well executed.
yeah. Yeah, and I think there's something very visceral in the text, in specifically the Polyphemus scene that I think he captured. Like the scene of Odysseus and his crew blinding Polyphemus in the Odyssey is skin crawling if you read the original Greek. So again, I think that was really captured by this film. I loved the Circe scene. That was maybe one of my favorite scenes. And I did this is one of the reasons why I was so wrestling with it because I think he also captures themes of the Odyssey that I haven't seen a lot of other adaptations capture,
Mm.
which were a lot of the reveals at the end sort of made come full circle, but the specifically how the Iliad and the Odyssey together are very much about war and the collapse of the Bronze Age in a sense. Like it is truly this is a story where all of the great heroes of mythology are dying for the most part. Like, almost nobody makes it out of the Iliad and the Odyssey alive and home again from all of these great heroes that start off these stories. And so, yeah, it is really about this sort of end of this era, which I
Mhm.
think, again, is a huge piece of this film. And it also reflects a real thing that happened in history, which is the Bronze Age collapse. And I think something else that I hadn't really talked about a lot in the Odyssey, but in the Emily Wilson translation, she talks a lot in her introduction to it, is also looking at the Odyssey from the angle of PTSD, of warfare, which is, again, a theme I think is underexplored that I really appreciate.
I think the thing that I really appreciated about the film is that he was able to pull all of these themes out of it that felt very relevant, that felt contemporary. Fantasy's a great space to do that, and so I think he did. I left the theater feeling like it was more about today and our time than
Mm,
some, you know,
It
fantasy.
didn't feel distant, right?
Yeah,
Like, it didn't feel like it was out of reach or
yeah,
unrelatable.
and
And I think it goes to that aspect that you're talking about, Emily, that there are translations that can highlight these aspects of the story that might
mhm.
not be immediately apparent. Of course, you have a close relationship to the source text. Chad, you told me you read it, when was it, in high school? Do you remember much of reading it for the first time?
yeah, I remember that it really captivated me. It was a story that I think that was kind of my introduction to the mythology and
Mm.
then kind of explored things from there. Yeah, I think that it definitely felt very contemporary to me in the themes that he pulled out.
And to be fair, Emily, I don't have a connection with the source text at all. I didn't read the Iliad and I didn't read the Odyssey. I've never read either of them. And to be perfectly honest with you, Emily, my access point to the text, as opposed to yours, was this is something that you're kind of encouraged to read. And there's aspects of this dramatic structure, of this narrative elsewhere. But in terms of a film adaptation, there haven't been too many. And that's maybe a good segue into this part of the
Mhm.
conversation as to what has been the narrative influence of
Mm.
Homer in story structure today, in literature today, in cinema today. And why do you think, the second part of the question, why do you think we haven't had too many adaptations of either the Iliad or the Odyssey hit the big screen? Because I don't know how things are going to fall in, but at least to me, this ends up being, after having seen the film,
Mhm.
probably the reference cinematic adaptation of that text moving forward. I don't know who else is going to come in and make
Yeah.
an adaptation that's going to supplant this.
Yeah, I think it's definitely well done enough that I think it would be very difficult to do it without inviting comparison, and I do think, again, the craft of the filmmaking and it is extremely thematically resonant. I think it would be it's a tough act to follow, so this might be a next generation, juggernaut of filmmakers coming in. Yeah, that's a great question, though, because The Iliad and the Odyssey are really they're both really interesting works. It's interesting to me also that I feel like people tend to gravitate I don't know, we sort of had a big adaptation of the Iliad and Troy in at least my lifetime.
I
Yeah.
actually just saw it for the first time before recording
Mhm.
it. It's a movie of its time. It's a
Mm.
big budget studio movie made by Wolfgang Peterson. It seems more genre, like sword and sandal
Mhm.
genre than attempt to
Yeah.
adapt a historical text, which is fine. That's okay. It was entertaining. Brad Pitt's abs is probably the only thing I'm going to remember apart from Eric Bana's very well manicured facial hair. I don't know how you get a shave that good back
Oh, that
then.
Hector Achilles fight is so iconic, though.
It's
That's
great. Oh, don't get me wrong, the action sequences work. Everything else looks like you're shooting this at a beach resort in Mexico, and everyone's just looking real good, really tanned, and just working out between
mm.
scenes.
Well, the fun tidbit there is that Nolan was originally attached to direct that.
No,
Yeah.
Oh.
we did not know.
Mm.
I wanna see
Yeah.
in
So he was actually
2004,
on the
it was finished.
development side. Yeah.
See, I don't know how that would have played out because obviously what we ended up seeing in Troy is very different than, even just the color palette used in the Odyssey. The color palette of the Odyssey is like dark grays and like beige, as opposed to, again, the Corona commercial cinematography. of Troy. Now, I'm being a little bit difficult on Troy, but hey, Emily, from your perspective, that was like sort of the reference Homeric adaptation before the Odyssey.
Yeah.
What sort of what setting does that put us in if that was her frame of reference before last weekend?
Mm.
Um, I think the approach to Troy, I think on the surface is similar to Nolan's in that I think both of them sought to make a film that I think felt grounded in the world of the Bronze Age Mediterranean
Mm,
that were set there, which is when the original works are set. And also, both films make the choice to remove the gods, but leave these sort of nods and question marks. And in Troy, they reference. I think it seems to me like watching Troy, the idea is this is sort of what really happened, and it inspires the myth. So, like for example, ending the movie with Achilles dead and the only arrow left in his body through his heel, I think, is meant to reference the myth of Achilles, where you could only kill him by shooting the Achilles heel when in the film we watch him get shot by a lot of arrows. That's actually why he dies.
it's the one arrow hitting the back of
Yeah.
his foot. It's all 38 of them that hit vital organs, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, and they bring in some fun references to other myths like the Aeneid, with the Orlando Bloom's Paris giving the sword of Troy, which is made up for the movie, to Aeneas at the end of the film. That's a reference to that epic. And yeah, so it felt like Troy was sort of it made a lot of sense to me that I think one of the writers was D.B. Weiss, who also wrote one of the writers of Game of Thrones. So it feels like a similar
Mhm,
philosophy on how
mhm.
gods and magic work in their fantasy worlds, of just sort of like using them as little as possible, essentially, to tell the story, which works really well for season 1 of Game of Thrones. But yeah, so I think I was curious what Nolan's take was gonna be, given that Troy had already kind of taken that approach to the epics. I will say with Troy, I have a lot of issues with it because it does love to change the plot of the Iliad.
Which is fine. I mean, I
You
get
might
it.
have
I
noticed
get
there are
for
characters that die in
a
Troy
2-hour
or in
film,
the
Emily,
Odyssey.
what do you expect? You have to have a beginning, middle, and end in 2 hours, during
Yeah,
the course of your large popcorn. As a
yeah,
film, I understand you condense a 10-year war into
mhm,
what, like, a 1 week or 2-week passage of time. I get it. But like you said, the very meaningful, explicit decision of let's tell these stories without the gods in it, I think is a crucial decision.
Yeah, I feel like it felt like a fever dream of the story. That's kind of was
mhm,
my initial takeaway of it. It felt like the elements were there. Yes, there's things that are looked over or done a little differently, but it felt like a fever dream version of it. And I think what he does really well is not fall into the Hollywood epic trap that we've seen a lot in the past of either beat by beat or like with these casting choices that they're all white British characters, you know?
Yeah,
Why
again,
are they
in
always
ancient
British?
Greece,
Yeah.
yeah, in ancient Greece, no one is speaking with a British accent in English, right? That's just again,
Mhm.
Right.
we don't wanna get lost in that rabbit hole, but those conventional
Yeah,
trappings that you mentioned, Chad. Those are the movies that seem like homework to me, frankly.
Mm, mhm.
And this didn't feel like homework. It felt, I think Fever Dream is a good reference, specifically as I think of, I can't believe I'm doing this, but you mentioned Troy. When we talk about a character like Agamemnon, you go from Brian Cox in Troy to Benny Safdie in the Odyssey. That's a bit of a jump, but that's a very reflective jump. And it was great to see Benny Safdie and Robert Pattinson, coming back together in a film because there is this manic
mhm,
Safdie-like energy in the pacing of the film where it
mhm,
starts and you just have to catch up with it. It's
mhm,
not going to stop. It feels like a freight train. There's that fatalistic aspect, obviously, to some of the Safdie's movies, but when you watch them, obviously in a completely different setting. But there was this spiritual connection I had with other movies, other very different movies when I was watching this film. That I found
sure.
very very interesting in that regard. That yes, it doesn't seem like this conventional Hollywood movie that, with all due respect to Wolfgang Peterson and Troy, that just seemed like something I'd watch with a Pepsi in the summer. This was a movie that I took a lot more seriously.
Mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think well, again, kind of going back to the adaptation question of it all too, one of the things, though, that I think had its a point forward for me in terms of looking forward to this particular director adapting this story is that one of the things that make the Iliad and the Odyssey so difficult to adapt is they are, by our current storytelling standards, very non-traditional, even though they are the tradition. They don't have three-act structures the way we have in most of our movies now and a lot of our storytelling. And a lot of it is nonlinear. A lot of the Odyssey is actually in stories told by others to audience members in the text. And so that was one element where, Christopher Nolan kind of loves to play with time and narrative in that way that I thought could be. I appreciated that he kept a lot of that in the film because the
Like,
actual Odyssey starts with Zeus and Athena and telling a story where Athena basically is going to Zeus and saying, "Hey, Odysseus needs to go home. These suitors are ravaging his lands. His wife is waiting on him. He's my favorite, and he's been trapped with Calypso. Can I go bring him home?" And she then also tells the story of Clytemnestra and Agamemnon, the killing of Agamemnon.
mhm.
That's the beginning of the Odyssey. And then Athena goes to both Telemachus and Odysseus and starts them both on their journeys. And the first sort of stop of Odysseus' journey is in this place called Phaeacia, which is not in the film. I honestly think it was fine to cut. He spends a long time there. But a huge piece of that is he essentially sits down and there's a bard singing and the bard starts to sing some stories of Troy. Odysseus starts crying, and they're asking him why, and he explains who he is, and he tells the story of his journey. And that's where we get the iconic Odyssey moments. Again, it's a lot of stories within stories and a lot of frame devices. And Odysseus doesn't show up in the Odyssey until there's so the text about the Iliad and the Odyssey are about 24 books long, with about approximately equal length chapters. Odysseus does not come into the Odyssey until book 5. So we're waiting a really long time. And then the actual Odyssey, the Cyclops, Circe, all of the adventures he goes on is 4 books worth of adventures out of 24. So most of the Odyssey is not what we think of as the Odyssey.
Yeah,
Um,
fascinating.
and so I think obviously that's like the most iconic. A lot of those scenes are so iconic and you see them referenced and replicated a lot. But if you're actually adapting the Odyssey as a text, literally, a lot of that film is going to not feel like the Odyssey to a modern audience. And I think it's interesting because the gods are obviously very important characters in both the Iliad and the Odyssey. That's another interesting aspect of adapting the Iliad is in the Iliad, half of the war is the gods fighting with each other because half the gods are on one side, half the gods are on the other. And they switch sides and they're very fickle. And it's just a really interesting dynamic piece of the story that reflects also in what's going on with the mortals below, which I think is another reason why the Iliad is so difficult to adapt. And I think also why a lot of modern adapters reach for cutting the gods because
Mm.
it saves on runtime because you're essentially cutting major subplots,
Yeah.
which a lot of adaptations of other works do generally. But I think there's also an interesting element though with ancient, and this is where we maybe get into some of my kind of gripes with this adaptation, but which again, I have very mixed feelings about just in terms of because I think Nolan's intended messaging and its impact on the audience is like to me really it like I think the message he conveyed to the audience was the message of the Odyssey. So I think on the one hand, I'm happy that it worked so well for other people and a lot of people are discovering these wonderful themes of this text through this film. But on the other hand, the way the gods and religion and faith is approached in this film is very modern and very anachronistic to me and very Christian, which speaks to the audience he's writing for
Right.
and connects with the audience he's writing for. But there is a part, and it's sort of an interesting divide too, because the thing with the ancient Greeks is I think we hear the names of their gods and their names to us. But for a lot of ancient religions, the names of the gods are often just really much more ancient, archaic forms of what the thing is. And so, there's the only example I can think of right now is a passage from the Aeneid, but there's a whole passage from the Aeneid where there's like a rumor spreading, and it's literally just rumor, capital R, the personified God character is just running through the town, but it's also it's like still metaphorical almost, but it bridges that gap. Like the gods are almost metaphors in a lot of mythology and how a lot of everyday Greeks would have experienced religion. I think for me, where the disconnect is in a loss of faith, because again, gods are not they're physical manifestations of the winds, the air you breathe, the sun beating down on your head. So I think losing faith is explored in the Odyssey, but I think the way it was presented in the film was in a way that felt a lot more Christian
Mm,
than, like, maybe it would have to an ancient Greek. So I, watching it, had a bit of a disconnect and found it hard to track
that's
because
interesting.
of my, background coming in. But it also clearly resonates in the way it should with audiences. So again, this is why I was wrestling with my feelings on this film. So
I think that's very fair, and I think that's fascinating in the sense that w the way that I approach the film, being someone that is lukewarm on Christopher Nolan in general, being someone that has no connection with the source text at all, I mean, I'm starting from 0. I was interested in the practice of adaptation. That's what
Mhm.
was interesting to me, and that's why I want to start the conversation in that. This is an exercise in adapting a timeless text for a timely audience. And this aspect that you were disconnecting with, I think, is a reflection of that, right? It takes a narrative angle that is not within the same, let's say, chronology or spirit that the original text may have, but probably has a greater resonance and more efficient impact with contemporary audiences. And I think between Chad and I, you can see that it it
Yeah.
spoke to us in that sense. What interested me about the Odyssey was primarily my connection to Jean-Luc Godard's Contempt. I don't know if you guys have been
Mm.
able to see the film. Early 1960s, Godard, probably at his least experimental, at his least obnoxious, making a quote unquote commercial film about making a commercial film and how that's a nightmare. For me, that loss of faith that I saw in Odysseus, in Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, connected me directly to Godard's film, which again is my point of reference, is the whole reason why I was interested in watching this movie in the first place. Jean-Luc Godard's Contempt is a story about a man, a screenwriter in this regard, disillusioned by what he considers an ethical dereliction of his professional duties, finds those shortcomings affecting his home life with his wife, resulting in a distance between the couple and the emergence of suitors with ill intent with the wife. And it's basically a reflection of a person's alienation with their working life, with their professional self coming
Mhm.
into the home self. These are psychological issues. These are 20th century, 21st century questions. These aren't Greek mythology questions. These aren't classical text issues. So what I enjoyed about obviously Fritz Lang's failed Odyssey in Contempt is the way that Christopher Nolan, probably not even realizing, is actually dealing with these things within the narrative himself. Now, of course,
Mhm.
if there's a filmmaker today that is able to push back producer interference, it's going to be Nolan. As we know, Godard had to deal with producers' interference in Contempt in a way that he reintroduced the film and created a nude scene for the first 5 minutes or first 3 minutes. It's absolutely unnecessary, just as a way to calm down his financiers, and then makes fun of them throughout the entire film. That's what always is sort of got me interested in a project like
Mhm.
this. How do you tackle the adaptation? Of course, we'll never see, Fritz Lang's fictional adaptation of the Odyssey, but if we're left with an adaptation, like I said, I don't mind this being a version of the text that's timely as opposed to timeless. Chad,
Mhm.
I don't know how you feel there as someone that's probably a little bit in the middle between Emily and myself.
I appreciated that throughout. I felt like there were a lot of he wasn't trying to create historical accuracy within the world that he was creating. And obviously it's fantasy. There's fantasy elements to it, but I didn't feel like he was trying to do that. I felt like he was actually sprinkling a lot of contemporary things throughout, even in the way that he sort of Ludwig Göransson, he gave him the directive of like, I don't want to hear like a traditional Hollywood score.
Mm,
I want to do something really unique there. in the way that that kind of rejects that traditional adaptation of the epic that I was talking about before. Yeah, so I felt like, and even with the end song on the end credits, I feel like he was really trying to talk to today's audience and taking out the things that he felt were relevant to today. The whole idea of like the breaking of bonds between men and the sort of rejection of hospitality. I think he was
Mhm.
pulling out some of those themes that are timeless to speak
Mhm.
to our time.
Well,
Yeah.
the whole Seuss's Law thing ended up being just a massive, massive driving part of
Mhm.
the spirit of the story. I don't know if that aligns with your reading of the text, Emily?
Oh, it's a huge part of the text.
Oh,
Absolutely.
okay. So it's something that he was able to pull in because it's at the heart of this. In the way that, for example, when I watch something like Troy, I'm there to watch partial nudity and gore. Basically, it's a sword and sandal film. That's why we all watch these movies.
Mhm.
Where obviously in the Nolan film, there's a little bit more substance because of that. And I'm glad that's something that's taken directly from the source material.
Yeah, that is actually, again, it's sort of, well, this sort of connects a little bit to one of the things I wanted to respond to that you said earlier, where you were talking about how, like, the homecoming of it all, and you were saying in Contempt you felt they were exploring these, like, deeper psychological themes that aren't classical when they very much are. Like, for me, always a huge thing I always like to remind people when talking about history is that people have always been people. I think sometimes when we read ancient texts, since we don't have a lot of context, we haven't lived in their world, we don't really know fully what's going on. Is a mistake you can make that you don't think of these people and societies as fully fleshed out. But the more you study history, the more you learn that actually everyone's always been like this. So it's a mistake, I think, to think ideas like and all of these existential questions
Mm.
are new. They're not. I mean, the Protestant Reformation came about because everyone thought the world was ending because we had the bubonic plague, we had climate change, the little ice age. A lot of people were dying, and a lot of people genuinely thought the gods were forsaking them. And if these are, this is sounding a little familiar, it's because it comes in cycles always, dark ages and quote unquote dark ages and, all of that. But the main concepts and ideas that we see come up in the Iliad and the Odyssey, the major, major themes in the Iliad, which are in conversation with each other in these two works. So the Iliad is sort of the story of the war, and the Odyssey is the story of the homecoming. Is this thing called kleos, which is a Greek word for glory. And kleos is a huge driving aspect of the Iliad, which is the idea of and he Achilles says this in the movie Troy. It's very famous, the choice of Achilles. Like, you can go to Troy and die, but your name will live forever, or you can stay home and have a happy life, essentially, but no one will remember you. It's like a central question, a central idea that both of these texts are grappling with. And so the Iliad is really an exploration of the cost of glory and what
Mm.
are you willing to give up to be remembered. Versus the Odyssey, the kind of ideal and theme is nostos, which is where we get the word nostalgia from,
Mm.
but it's the homecoming. It's the yearning for home. It's why Penelope is such a major character in these books, and the Telemachus storyline is such a major piece of the Odyssey. Is because it's about it explores a lot of that element of this society and what being at home is like, what the appeal of home is. And it's sort of this, again, this internal question of like, which thing do you value the most? And what is the cost of that? That these texts are having in conversation with each other. Um, and another huge piece of the Odyssey is this thing called xenia, which is essentially welcoming of strangers into your home, and which is a huge piece of ancient Greek culture and society because the way ancient Greece is, most of the islands can't really completely independently economically sustain themselves in ancient times. There's just not enough space to grow. There's some Greek islands that have like one tree. Like, and there's so many of them. And so a huge aspect of ancient Mediterranean ways is the trade network. It's
Mm.
the connecting with other people, which is why the Bronze Age collapse was such a big deal, is because the trade networks fell apart. And without the trade networks, society just went into a huge regression. And so, anyway, so a lot of these are huge central aspects of the Odyssey and what a lot of the story is grappling with.
And I thought they were very well executed, especially the aspect of welcoming someone in your home, and of course that third act component where Odysseus goes into just the actual weight of the Trojan
Mhm.
horse, morally
Yeah.
and ethically, and the cost of that. I mean, I thought that was very ingeniously depicted in the film.
I'm actually curious how the killing of the suitors went over for you, because that was one of the adaptational changes that I wasn't sure how it played out, because for me, it felt like because of the changes made to Odysseus's character and motivation, I don't think it resonated as strongly as it does in the original,
No, it
the
didn't work.
reclaiming of the home.
No, I mean, it was, as I mentioned, it was the most conventional part of the film. It felt like, "Hey, let's get some Batman Begins fight choreography, and
Mhm.
let's make a nice, denouement action sequence to build out of this, and then we're gonna have the dramatic monologue right at the end," which, by the way, the dramatic monologue works. I think
Yeah.
the killing of the suitors really did take me out of the film. It
Mhm.
seemed like the most, quote, unquote, "movie" part of the movie. And I needed the monologue to connect me back to
Mm.
what I felt was the most resonant part of the film, which is its
Mhm.
thematic elements. I did need those 5 minutes, that dramatic scene, that intimate scene between 2 leads, and that's what I came home with. I came home with not only thinking of all the great adventures, everything that I saw, but it was everything that I felt in that 5-minute long monologue, which I thought was superbly done by the actors, very well directed, very well shot. That drove me home. Talk about homecoming, that took me home. That parked the car successfully for the
Mm.
entire production. I think that works. Before then, I'll be very upfront, and as we talk about the humanity of these characters, so that remember that we're trying to see them as people, not just as mythical archetypes. I don't know in which universe you come home to your wife and you say, "Hey, listen, I went through this huge ordeal, but don't worry about the last 7 years, honey. I was just in a deserted island with Charlize Theron getting high at the beach, and there's nothing to see here. Let's not talk about that part of it. Did I tell you about the Cyclops? Also, my friends are all pigs now." Like,
Mhm.
there's a little bit of a disconnect here. I feel my wife would probably focus a little bit more on, "Tell me about the Charlize Theron part, and how many years of all the ones were you missing? Were you on that island?" We might have gotten stuck there. I don't know. But listen, I respect everyone's relationship.
Yeah, I know. This is again where we get into the psychology of it all, where it's like, we don't know exactly how much of a role. Like, I think again to impose sort of our modern idea of what a marriage is onto the
Mhm.
past and the morality of everything going on. It's a huge question mark for us. Like, we just don't really know.
Sure.
But I think in the story itself, it's a bit more. I think it's meant to be taken also a bit more symbolically, just in the sense of like Penelope is the keeper of the home. She is home. Their relationship is home. The place that they built together is home. And I think, well, it's one of the reasons why she's such a great character also is because, women generally not always very well represented in ancient storytelling. And not only women, but women like Penelope, who is presented in the text as an intellectual and like powerful equal to Odysseus. Like they're a true match personality wise. Like she is not subservient to him in the original at all in the way one might expect if you're thinking about, the way marriages tended to go even a few hundred years ago. And yeah, so I think her element there is such a huge piece of that. And in the original text, because of the framing, I think where Odysseus is weighing his own breaking of Xenia and being hosted, I think that's sort of the thing that this film I think doesn't quite land the plane on for me. Because that we've shifted our focus onto that, the reclaiming of the home from the suitors, which in the Odyssey, like the suitors are the one breaking guest rights. That's a
Mm,
huge aspect of it. Like what they are doing and how they are defiling the house that's the tension in the story. That's like the real stakes and the driving force.
right.
Versus, I think in this film, the stakes have pushed up a bit onto the sort of people coming from the sea and the fear of existential.
Mhm.
When in the Odyssey, it's not an existential fear. They are literally eating up his wealth and house.
In
Uh-huh.
in the Nolan movie, it just feels like a nuisance. It feels like they're bad house guests,
Yeah.
like, they keep on hitting on your wife, and they're
It
eating all your food. All your wine's gone. Don't check
yeah.
this out. And that seems
Yeah.
annoying, but it doesn't seem like a huge
Yeah. Well,
ethical or moral boundary crossing.
yeah, and you have to remember in the ancient world, your wealth was your property and specifically your livestock. Your most people in this world are farmers. There's no
Right,
supermarkets. Everyone's growing most of their own food. So someone coming in and eating everything and slaughtering your animals, which means, your cows aren't producing milk anymore. Your sheep aren't producing wool because they're dead. It's
right.
very gluttonous. So you have to kind of keep that in mind a little bit. That a lot of wealth was actually in your livestock, was in even if you were a king. That was like it wasn't as much in like precious things. But, so them kind of eating all of that, consuming it for so long, it really they're hitting a point in the original where it's like, "We can't take this anymore," which is why Penelope is being pressured into it. But so in that sense, also the reclaiming of the suitors feels a lot more like purging the house of those who don't respect it, instead of, I think in this film, a consequence of the storytelling and the shifts, we kind of lose that a little bit. And so I think that again is one of my thematic question marks on this film, but that doesn't quite follow the text. Like I do think we lose a little bit of that sense of home in this adaptation.
I think that's interesting, yeah. I mean,
'Cause,
Chad, did it feel like that was lost on your end coming from where you were watching the film?
No, no, I don't think it did. I felt the weight of all of the suitors there and what that was doing to the family and to the home, and I did feel that purging, and I think, we talk about the John Wick-ness of it all. uh, I do think you that he was smart in having that entire action sequence, because I wonder how modern audiences take that movie if you take that entire sequence out
I don't
and
yeah.
know.
basically
I
I
mean,
would've
that
I
sequence
would've
is also, for the record, one of the most iconic parts of the Odyssey. Like
oh,
the
no.
the the bowstringing, the firing, all of that, that's straight from the text.
but in terms of that him killing all of them, that's the part that's not in the text, or it
Oh, no,
is?
that's in the text. They
Okay.
kill everyone. Actually,
They
they
all die.
they they all die, and then this is not in the film, but they hang all the maids also. Like, everybody
Oh,
who
no.
yeah,
Everyone in
Mia
that
got
house
this
gets
did.
out. Man.
The whole, yeah, they lock the weapons away, they trap them. The sequence of Telemachus and that one guy fighting about giving them the weapons back, that's an invention of this film, but it's in the spirit of what happens. And but in the text, Telemachus is fighting side by side with Odysseus in that scene
Yeah.
against all the suitors.
No, and I can understand. Listen, this is a big action set. I see this from my perspective, not someone connected to the text. I see this as an action set piece, right? And I see this from the lens of Hollywood storytelling, and it was the most, let's say, familiar and conventional aspect of the film. Now, it's great to hear that it appears in the source material, that it's a big part of it, because you guys are right. I don't think how do you wrap the story up without that, right? You need to
Yeah.
have this moment of confrontation at the end, but it was, I think, after everything that we'd seen in the film, I think visually, the entire film is a treat. There are aspects I didn't even know the story, to be completely honest. Like, my only connection to this is the quote unquote adaptation headaches from Contempt. To just experience the entire story the way I did, it was an exhilarating ride that
Mhm.
for me had a very recognizable ending. But again, it was effective thanks to that 5-minute moment, that human moment, that moment between husband and wife that can connect everything that happened and contextualize the anxieties, the fears, the threats, the adventures, everything. Distills it perfectly before you get obviously to the epilogue. So all in all, Emily, I think it's been a great reaction to the film from audiences, where you have folks like yourself that have a lot of background in the story, sort of finding your place within the reaction of it all, right? Like, how does my experience being connected to the story reflect on how I watch this movie? Folks like Chad that you have a connection with the story. You remember reading it. You get to now experience this on the big screen. And people like myself that are coming in completely blind, completely new to all of this. If it was a mixed reaction that you had, all in all, do you think, apart from that or aside from that, that it was an effective take on the story in the year 2026?
Hmm.
Oh, this is good. That's what we bring you here for.
Yes, because I haven't really brought up my main gripe with this film,
Oh, this is
which
where we
is
do
sort
it.
of the
Um,
reason why I kind of knew going in this was how I was going to feel.
Okay.
But I think he did so much else well that I really was wrestling with it because I was like, "Well, he did do it, but" and it is a big but, which is a but that I believe is very common throughout most of Christopher Nolan's films, which is the Odyssey, in my opinion, is about women. This movie was not about women.
Kat, what did we bring up? What did we bring up in last week's episode? This
Yeah,
is this
yeah.
is a common theme in Christopher Nolan's films. As great a filmmaker he is, there are storytelling flaws. He struggles at the script and storytelling level with female characters, always has. And if it's not an exposition dump, it's hard to find a real moment of agency in a story. And Emily, it's really interesting to hear this from you because I have to be honest, when I was watching it, I felt like, well, as someone that isn't familiar with the story, it makes sense that Nolan would tackle something like this that's so male driven because I didn't by the way he presented the film to me as someone not familiar with the text, I did not know where you could possibly bring these moments of agency that I feel you could have brought in other films that he's made. But what you're telling me, I think, is very telling in that, no, wait a minute. There are moments throughout the entire source material that just don't show up here.
Yes. And I think I'll go back to what I said before. Only 4 out of 24 books of the Odyssey is Odysseus on his journey.
Hmm.
What happens in the rest of it? But there's even a lot of elements of the story, and again, I can understand making certain adaptational decisions, but I think for me it was, for example, Athena is a huge, very active character in the Odyssey who has now been reduced to a very small, very powerful, I will grant you, but very small role in terms of her actual agency. Now, I can put that one aside because of the decision of the gods as a whole in the story, and I think the way that was done was I enjoyed that as an adaptational choice. And I think there are certain elements, again, that worked for me, like Circe, but overall, so much of this story, like, because I mentioned, basically, the central theme of the Odyssey is the home, and in this society, who's keeping the home? It's Penelope, it's all of the women that have been holding down the fort while everyone's been fighting at Troy. And there's so many moments in the original text. I feel like with Penelope, again, I can see how these decisions were made from a writing perspective, just in terms of keeping the tension high, keeping, the story engaging. But at the same time, we don't really see Penelope in her power in this film. We see her struggling with it. We see the sort of end of it instead of getting a lot more of a clear picture. Likewise, I personally did not like the decisions they made with Helen in this film. In the original Odyssey, when Telemachus goes to visit Menelaus and Helen to learn of his father, Helen is running the household like nothing's happened. She's weaving. She even does magic a little bit in the story to calm everyone's sorrow. And she has a lot. She and Telemachus speak the most, I would say. And we get some stories from Menelaus about his sort of journey back. But she's sort of this figure of like, wow, you're the one all of this was for, and now you're back home like nothing happened. And she's a very, very interesting character in both of these texts, and I just really didn't enjoy the decision to really take away her voice in
It
this.
felt really sidelined. It's interesting you say that because
Yeah,
again, not familiar with these texts. It wasn't until watching Troy that I'm like, oh wow,
yeah,
she actually has a really big part in all of this, and she's been sidelined, you know, dramatically in Christopher
yeah,
Nolan's adaptation. Maybe has a handful of lines,
yeah,
monosyllabic lines, even like it's barely anything there.
Yeah, and another piece of it too is when Odysseus goes to the underworld in the Odyssey, he talks to Achilles, who in this version, Sinon, that character, is in the Aeneid. He's not actually in Homer at all. He's from the mythology, but he's not in these particular texts. Now, I did enjoy that storyline a lot, and I thought it brought value. But in the Odyssey, when Odysseus goes to the underworld, he speaks to Achilles and he speaks to Agamemnon, and then he sees his mother who's died from grieving him, and they talk, and then the rest of that sequence is him talking to women. It's all of these women from mythology, like Ariadne, really famous figures or mothers of heroes, or all of these women who literally are talking about how they've been marginalized by being someone's mom or wife or having this horrible fate. Even ones who, in other versions of their myths, actually have happy endings, are in the underworld talking to Odysseus about their experience. And again, that's something that's just not in this film. And it's not in most Odyssey adaptations, but I don't know, like there could have been a place visually, even in this
Mm.
film for that. There's also a very important character and very iconic character that I don't think I've ever really seen her adapted in any Odyssey adaptation, but she's famous in pop culture. Her name's Cassandra. She's, in a way, I think, the Athena, Zendaya's character, this priestess of Athena in Troy, is, I think she's a kind of callback to this character, but Cassandra is a priestess of Troy whose curse is accurate prophecy, but no one will ever believe her. And so when they're bringing the horse in, she's saying, "Don't do that. I know what's gonna happen. It's bad."
There's
And no one
people on that
believes her.
horse. Watch out for the horse.
And yeah, and then she kind of has a terrible fate during the sack of Troy because he was a Trojan, and she gets taken back to as a slave by Agamemnon and is killed by his wife in addition to Agamemnon, and is part of that story. And it's like we've gotten that a kind of nod to that, but we also have it without that element of, like we don't believe women, and that's what causes so many problems element in the
Mm.
story and the subtext. So again, I think on the one hand it is a bit unfair to judge an adaptation by what they choose to leave out instead of what's in it. But considering what they're leaving out and how core it is to the Odyssey to me, and the fact that, it's nothing new, unfortunately,
Mm.
to like it's in a way very much about marginalization of women. It's just I think that for me is why it makes me sad that this is such a great movie in so many other ways. It's because it's sort of taking this story that does center women a lot more and removing them from the conversation.
Again, your criticism here isn't on what the film is, it's on the film and what it could have been. And what it
Yeah.
could have been, that potential, right, is always going to be there as an asterisk for someone that has, strong ties to the source material, and those are the discussions that I love to have about films. It's not really an "I like this, I don't like this." It's a sitting back and saying, at the end of the day, this is an adaptation. You're taking a story and you're forming it into this visual feast, and we can have a conversation about visual storytelling and how amazing it is. I think we all agree it works great. But I think the real meat or the real substance here is how do we take this timeless story and what do we pick and choose from it to include in this retelling? And I really, really do appreciate your perspective and coming in and saying, hey, I get that's how they went. This is how the story speaks to me. And I'm a little bit sad that it wasn't there. I think there's very legitimate gripes and aspects of the story that, to be perfectly honest, it didn't come to mind immediately seeing Nolan's film, and because someone that is unfamiliar with the source material wouldn't even think that they're there, probably accentuates your point a little bit more in saying, "Daniel, there's so much more to this that we could have gone into that obviously wasn't, immediately present." So thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights on this.
Yeah. I do really enjoy talking about this, and I think there's a lot here to discuss, which I think is the mark of a great movie too. So
Mm.
the fact that we're all having such in-depth conversation about these themes, which are timely. So again, there's so much to love here. So
And that's why we get together. That's why we watch them. That's why we discuss them. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Box Office Podcast, Emily. The Odyssey from Universal Pictures is currently in wide release, starring Spider-Man, Batman, Catwoman, Mary Jane Watson, The Punisher, Furiosa, Luigi, and of course, Matt Damon trying to get back home. You can find that in a theater near you. Coming up next here on the Box Office Podcast, we've got the organizers of Rocky Mountain NATO, the upcoming convention here in the exhibition calendar. Rebecca Pauley and her interview is coming up after this break.
I am here on the Box Office Podcast with Diane Eve, Regional Director of Rocky Mountain NATO, and Candis Harrop, longtime exhibitor and organizer of the Rocky Mountain NATO Annual Trade Convention, kicking off on September 1st. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. We're super excited to be here to promote the Rocky Mountain Theater Convention.
And just get the logistical stuff done off the bat here, rmnato.com for anyone who wants to find out more information. And online registrations are on sale until August 15th. Is that correct?
That's correct. Online registration is open through August 15th. After that, you'll be able to register in person at the in-person registration rates beginning September 1st in Spokane, Washington.
Okay. So, Rocky Mountain NATO, I know 7 states in that region, but that's not exclusively who attends the show. Can you give us a little bit of background on what your attendee situation is typically like?
Certainly. We are a small, intimate gathering of folks, and it is generally made up of independent theater operators from not only the Rocky Mountain region, which includes Colorado, Idaho, Montana, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming, but we also welcome exhibitors from outside our region, such as the folks from the Pacific Northwest Theater Owners, also called Pinto, from Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. And we've also invited exhibitors from NICE, the theater group in Canada. So we are excited to welcome them this year. And honestly, we are so welcoming of any theater operator who would find our show valuable to attend our show.
Well, Candis, that's something I wanted to ask you about because, in addition to being involved with the Rocky Mountain Theater Convention, you also have been with Polson Theaters for 36 years. So you're very familiar with the trade show side and the independent circuit side of the industry. Coming from those two perspectives, can you talk a little bit about what you've gotten from the Rocky Mountain Theater Convention over the years? What have been some of the greatest, I guess, points of value for you?
Attending the Rocky Mountain Theater Convention, that it's rejuvenating. I think it's rejuvenating for everyone, but I do know that as an exhibitor, it really makes a big difference because you kind of get used to doing your job and that's all you do, and you kind of forget, the magic of what our widget is, what we produce. We have all those people in those seats and they're seeing the magic of what the studios have to bring. But you can't do that without, your venue, the studio, and everything from a mop bucket to a projector. And so I think that being able to meet with all those vendors that can fill all the needs for inside your theater and be able to see them in person really, really gets you so that, and you get to see them in person. You get to have those conversations, and by the time you leave, you have met with those vendors, you've seen a movie, you've talked to your film reps, and you are just ready to go back and just conquer everything when you get home. So I really do feel that the theater convention, being able to meet with people that are like-minded and things like that really brings value.
The timing is great. I mean, you have the pre-show golf event on the 31st, then kick off officially the 1st going through the 3rd of September. Like, everybody's had a little bit of time to decompress from the
Yes.
summer. It's a little bit of a quieter period on the schedule, and you can really kind of get that enthusiasm and that love of the industry, really back into high gear in advance of the holiday season.
Yeah, I want to say that this week, being the week that leads into Labor Day weekend, is really going to be a nice week because people will have that opportunity to step away from their operations and just relax just for a bit, but take in some great education and networking and I think it will be a great way for them to lead into the Labor Day weekend.
Mhm, mhm. The networking component is so important. I mean, not just from just talking to people and getting business cards and getting emails, but really just getting inspired by talking to people who know what the struggles are, who know what the high points are. I see you start with the meet and greet on that first official day of the show on Tuesday. You have the opening night mixer. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, the schedule and what are the like programs and the educational stuff versus you have time to go off and meet with people and really chat kind of independent of the show.
Well, I can start with our kickoff for Tuesday night. We will be going to the Regal in Spokane Valley, and we at that time we'll have a chance to thank our sponsors. The sponsors will have a chance to introduce themselves, and then Angel is bringing Runner. And so we will have that screening, that exclusive screening that night. And then after we leave the theater, then we will go back to the hotel for, a little bit of drinks and food and conversation.
Correct me if I'm wrong. It's Runner is the one with Alan Richardson where he's getting an organ to a little girl and he's
Yes,
being hunted. That trailer played so well at CinemaCon and
yes.
it looks so fun. I mean, you can always
Yeah,
trust Angel to really bop around with different
yeah.
genres.
Yes, and the drug cartel is trying to take that little girl's liver. They're not
Yes.
gonna let them do it.
On Wednesday morning, we are going to begin our day with a special breakfast presentation by our primary sponsors, which include our marquee sponsors and platinum sponsors and gold sponsors, where they'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit longer about their services that they offer and set up appointments with attendees before and after the trade show. So for the remainder of the convention. Then we move into our trade show, which is from 9 to noon on Wednesday. That's going to be a great opportunity where you're going to see, 50-ish vendors from the industry, as Candis had described. And then we'll have a lunch. And then in the afternoon, we'll walk over to AMC Cinemas, just a few blocks away from the Davenport Hotel, for studio film marketing presentations. So we have a great lineup of studios who will be showing us their work that's coming up, and Candace can speak about that.
The best part about this when we go over to the theater is that we don't just see previews or trailers that you can, get on the web.
They've been on
Um,
YouTube for
th
months. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. They will bring footage, sneak peeks, exciting exclusive content. I mean, it's a fun time to see some things that no one else gets to see. And right now, we have Disney, Amazon MGM, Angel, Sony Pictures, Universal, and Paramount are confirmed and in. I am still talking with A24 and Lionsgate, and every once in a while, then too, we'll also get an independent film company that likes to come. We're very excited after we do those film marketing presentations right outside of the auditorium. We do an exclusive studio trade show. And so at that time, everyone can go around, they can talk to their marketing people or the people who they book movies with. There's some swag, that's handed out, and it's really a good time for that one-on-one, and you're all excited, by the time you hit the trade show because 'cause you've seen, all that footage already. And so that's that's what we do at the theater.
Mm. And yeah, definitely, I know it's a bit talking this early because 'cause we're talking in July and, like, the schedule's not set. I know you guys are, like, are working hard
Yeah.
to get everything, so it
Yeah.
definitely check out RM NATO as after you've listened to this interview a little bit, closer to the date maybe to see as things get updated, as things get added. I know
Yeah.
there is a screening that's gonna be on Wednesday night as well, though I know it's not kinda
Yes.
TBD.
Yes, and that's to be announced. So, a
Mhm.
secret for now.
And then on Wednesday night, we have the scholarship fund cocktail reception, and then the scholarship fund dinner and raffle. Can you talk a little bit about the scholarship fund and who it kind of helps to get out to the show?
Yes, our Rocky Mountain Scholarship Fund benefits student employees of member theaters in the Rocky Mountain region. And for the last 2 years, we've given out $7,000 in awards per year. So we are each year incrementally trying to increase that amount. And it's just been a real joy to read the applicant letters and make those awards possible. So, how we do that is we have raffle drawings for different prizes and things that are generously donated by our vendors, studios, other attendees, and we just have a little fun evening and generate a bit of revenue for our scholarship fund.
Mhm. It's so important. I mean, you hear so many people who have been in the industry for decades who their first job was scooping popcorn, and you really have to foster that love of the industry early on so people want to make a career out of it.
Absolutely.
We have that educational day on Thursday. Could you give us a little bit of insight into maybe like what general topics are going to be on the table here?
Yes. Well, first and foremost, I want to say that our Education Day organizer, Lynn Blakesley, with the Roxy Theater in Forsyth, Montana, is always exceptional in organizing our annual Education Day. So I think what she has crafted this year is just really great. But Thursday, we are going to start off with Cinema United and iTalk update featuring 3 individuals from Cinema United. So we'll have Amanda Martin, the Chief of Staff, and Becky Dupuis. She is Executive Board Member of Cinema United, and also Todd Bradenberg, Executive Board Member. So it'll be really nice to have 3 people there so that our attendees will have the opportunity to do Q&A with them and ask their most pressing questions about current issues affecting them in the industry. Then we will move into a presentation from the American Society for Asset Protection. I think this is going to be a great presentation. It's called Don't Kill Your Golden Goose: Succession Strategies to Protect and Perpetuate Your Business.
Mhm.
I really think that specific to our independent operators, this will really give them a lot of good information to think about and take forward as they plan for the succession of their operations.
Yeah, 'cause
And
that one
then,
stood out for me as well too. I mean, it's such an
yeah,
important subject, and it's
Yeah.
one that benefits maybe from, like, outside expertise outside the industry, and then you can select time, you can talk with people who know more industry-specific things. I mean, it's so important, and it can be tricky.
yes, absolutely. You'll get a great sense of our entire programming, as you click on our schedule of events on our website at rmnato.com. But a couple other things I wanted to point out: we will have a presentation on workplace de-escalation that's put on by the Center for Personal Protection and Safety. So, when tensions rise, will your workplace be ready? Have you done enough to protect your staff and customers? I think that's going to be another excellent presentation. So, definitely not miss. The third one is being presented by Win Salish of Casablanca Payments, and he is also a silver sponsor this year. His presentation is on payments intelligence and data security.
If
How to
anyone knows that, it's Win.
Yes,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, yeah.
Well, and Win has presented here and there in years past, and it's always amazing what we don't know
Mhm.
that we just need to constantly keep learning. So we're really excited to bring Win back with us and have him give us an update on payments intelligence. So very happy to do that.
Yeah, and it's so easy to say, "Oh, I'm not a techie person," or, "Oh, we haven't really had an issue that needed de-escalation, so, I don't know how," but especially if you're an independent, smaller operation, like, you do have to know a little bit about everything, a little
Yes.
bit at minimum.
Yes, yes. I feel that 2 of our other sessions really will round out our education day very nicely. One of them is called Lightning Fast Learning. It's quick focused learning on a few different topics. We're still dialing those in, but that will prove to be a great a great panel discussion section. We're going to talk about collectibles, screens and projectors. We might dive into some social media with a social media expert that's based right here in Spokane. I think that's going to be fantastic. And then at the end of our day, as always, the popular pub talk discussion of industry hot topics. So uh, we could go
there's a big hot topic that's been in the news
Yeah.
lately.
exactly.
Oof.
And I think, that's always it's a really lively way to end our convention and just really gets people talking about important subject matters.
Of all the times that I've gone to the convention, all we hear while we're there is how much they love our convention.
Mhm.
And the vendors, they love it because, of course, who they talk to at this convention are the decision makers. It is the owners, that are there in person, to make some of these decisions. And I think that brings a lot of value to our convention for the vendors. And then we also, with the studios there, for a while it was kind of hard, like pulling teeth almost to get them to come. And now they are just, I mean, they are eager and they are ready because they want to visit with us too.
Mhm.
You get used to, kind of living in this techie world where emails and things like that are how you communicate. And
Mhm.
it is really valuable for us to sit down and be able to have these conversations,
Mm.
especially about marketing and things like that, because
Yeah.
when you can sit down with your film people and talk about marketing and they can help you with things that you might want to do in your lobby and
Mhm.
just ways to get products from them. It is a very valuable resource that you get when you come to the convention.
So you look at a studio like Angel, they're so
Yeah.
proactive about working with exhibitors. Like they want to talk to you
Yes.
about marketing, about the best way to get the film out there. So I did wanna mention the scholarship, the schedule of events, all the programming, but the locale you have here for your show, the historic Davenport Inn, is it's so gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's like
You will
even outside of the convention events, I mean, you're in a really beautiful city and a really beautiful space. It's not like a lot of nice quiet nooks of the sort that you don't find at CinemaCon.
Yeah, it'll be the most beautiful trade show you've ever gone to. When you have the trade show at the Davenport and you have those chandeliers and all the thing, I mean, it's quite something to see. So,
Well, as we mentioned to here at the top of this interview, online registration will be open until August 15th at rmnato.com. I know early bird pricing has already passed, but you said there's going to be a little code if you put in box office all one word, you can get a discount. If I think we're still working out exactly what that's going to be, but yes,
Yes,
awesome.
absolutely. You will get a $25 discount off your registration. And I would like to say that your registration includes all your meals, all the events for all 3 days. So it is quite a value, not only for cinema attendees, but also our vendors. So we feel that it's quite a value. I would like to take a moment to introduce Irma Holguin. She is new to our convention team, and
Mm.
she is handling convention registration as well as helping me juggle all the different aspects of the show this year. So,
So she
really,
makes sure it goes off she makes sure it happens.
yeah.
absolutely. Yes, it has been wonderful to have Irma join our team so that we have Irma, Candis, Harrop, Lynn Blakesley and myself who are all working to put on the show. And then when we're at the show, we have Bruce Harrop, who is working hard behind the scenes to set up the trade show for our vendors. The vendors just love Bruce. And Gary Dupuis, he handles our golf event. So our group of roughly 6 people puts on a fantastic show for our attendees. So happy to work with them.
It looks like an amazing, amazing show, and yeah, I register today, register up until August 15th online or later on in person. Uh,
Yes, you can register in person at the Rocky Mountain Theater Convention in Spokane, Washington, beginning September 1st.
And a big thank you to our friends from Rocky Mountain NATO. Earlier, you heard from my colleague, Chad Kennerk, and our colleague at the box office company, Emily Garber. You can find her insights on this and many other stories from this era in Monster Donut, a Percy Jackson podcast, available on all podcasting platforms. Thank you so much for listening. And don't forget to tune in next week in our big Spider-Man preview. We've got some special guests lined up. Thank you for listening to the Box Office Podcast, and we'll talk to you again real soon.